Liberty in our lifetimes in a free state of our own. That's the vision. That's the dream. We are building it in New Hampshire. I'm Eric Brakey, your host and renegade statesman for the Porcupine Report. Welcome to your source for porcupine news and free-range conversation on matters of liberty. All right, let's hop into the show. Hey there, you porcupine, you. This is your host, your renegade statesman, your executive director of the Free State Project, Eric Brakey. Thank you for joining us for episode 59 of the Porcupine Report. 59 episodes, 59 weeks. Thanks for being with us on this journey. As always, please go ahead and like, share, whatever makes sense for whatever platform you're enjoying this content. If you're on Spotify, hit the bell so that you get alerts when new episodes come out. If you're on X or Facebook, share it with your friends so that they can know about the great conversations on liberty that are happening today on the Porcupine Report. I'm sure they don't want to miss this, so you'd kind of be a bad friend if you don't share it. And we all want to be good friends, right? Because we know Free Staters are good neighbors, and being a good neighbor means letting your neighbors know that there's great content happening on the Porcupine Report. We're going to have a great episode today. First, a little bit of news on the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, which is coming up. Boy, it's just weeks away this month, April 24th through the 27th. Tickets are selling fast. We've got great speakers lined up. Our goal for this conference was to get 200 people there, sell 200 tickets. We've still got a few weeks to go, and we just hit 200 tickets the other day. So we're starting to hit capacity, though I am doing what I can since there's so much demand to come to Liberty Forum. I'm doing what I can to expand the use of the space that we're using here, so we've got more capacity for more people. So it's a great problem to have, but it does mean for you, if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, tickets are running short. We may very well sell out. So right now I'm operating with the premise that we can expand our capacity to 250. So that means about 50 more tickets available. So you're going to want to go and get yours at nhlibertyforum.com. Time is running short. Tickets are running short. So go ahead and get yours and use the discount code Granite Gulch, a gift from me to you, to grab your tickets. And by the way, that'll give you 10% off. Now, that discount code Granite Gulch also works for PorcFest, the Porcupine Freedom Festival, coming up June 16th through the 22nd. Our theme this year is Taste the Revolution. Come and experience the Liberty Revolution. Get a little taste of it, what's happening in the free state of New Hampshire. Great guests coming out for PorcFest, including Joel Salatin, including Connor Boyack, Scott Horton, so many others, including our guest who's going to be on the program today. I'll introduce him in just a moment. So get your tickets, porcfest.com, pork with a C, not a K, because it's a Porcupine Freedom Festival. It doesn't have anything to do with pigs. No, so not that kind of pork, porcupines, though I will say we, of course, with a theme like Taste the Revolution, we are leaning into some wonderful food freedom, and there'll be some great food to enjoy, including the return of the one-pot cook-off. And we're currently looking for chefs and contestants to be a part of that. Tickets will be sold for that one-pot cook-off. You get to, if you are a chef for the one-pot cook-off, you're making one pot and you are sharing it with ticket holders for that event. People are going to go around to the different campsites that are participating, taste the different dishes that are available, and they're gonna vote on what they think was the best dish. There will be cash prizes for the best dishes, and of course, incredible bragging rights. I mean, who wouldn't want to be the winner of the one-pot cook-off the year the theme is Taste the Revolution? That's some great bragging rights right there. So if you're interested, learn more at porcfest.com and get your tickets while you are there. And I do also want to say, if you remember several episodes back, we had Representative Michael Granger on this show, and he was talking about his legislation to repeal the vehicle inspection mandate in New Hampshire, a little piece of freedom. that we're trying to restore. And by we, I mean free staters, those working in the legislature, are trying to restore. That did pass the House of Representatives with very strong numbers, as I previously reported. It is currently in the Senate. They just had 2 days of public hearings in the Senate on this bill. A lot of 2 days. That's rare to have a 2-day public hearing. A lot of people turning out in support of repealing that vehicle inspection sticker requirement. Now, of course, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We do not do any direct policy advocacy. That's not our role. We have many strategic partners like the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, like Americans for Prosperity, who do that work. I just want to let you know, though, that some people are contacting their senators and letting them know what they think, because that vote will be coming up in the near future. I'm not telling you that you should do that. That's not something that we do. I'm just telling you that some people are contacting their state senators and asking them to repeal the vehicle inspection mandate. And you can do with that what you will. So anyway, congratulations to Representative Michael Granger on his legislation getting this far. I personally think it's a good piece of legislation. All right, on to our conversation for today's episode. So our guest today is a returning guest, third time on the Porcupine Report, but it's been a little while. His name is Jack Hunter. He writes for a number of outlets, including for many years. He's been a writer with the American Conservative magazine. He writes for the Libertarian Institute, which is run by our good friend Scott Horton. He also is involved with Based Politics, which is also Friends of Liberty. Hannah Cox and Brad Palumbo are involved with that. Hannah Cox actually will be coming to PorcFest as well. And he also runs an outfit called the Rand Paul Review on Substack, kind of highlighting some of the work that Rand Paul is doing in the U.S. Senate, and oftentimes Rand retweets those pieces there from the Rand Paul Review. Anyway, his name is Jack Hunter. We're glad to have him back on the show. He's going to be one of our guests at PorcFest, and I just saw him over the weekend in Atlanta. We were both down for the Young Americans for Liberty YALCON regional conference there. Of course, I was telling everyone about the Free State Project and telling them why they should come to PorcFest, because that's my job, is get good Liberty folks out there to come and experience New Hampshire, to see just what they're missing out on, so that they come and spend more time here, and maybe even as they come for a visit, they might decide to stay for a lifetime. I know that Jack is pretty committed to South Carolina, but a man can dream that one day we'll convince Jack Hunter to join us in New Hampshire. Anyway, without more bloviating on my part, welcome to the show, Jack Hunter.
Good to be with you.
Hey, Jack, it was great to see you. I know I want to talk certainly during this episode. I'd love to talk a little bit more about actually the panel discussion that we had at YALCON, which was about the legacy of Ron Paul and the Ron Paul revolution, the Ron Paul movement. Particularly this year, Ron Paul turns 90 years old. But before we get to that, you had a great piece at the American Conservative magazine recently, which echoed a lot of my thoughts about something that happened the other week, which was this supposed filibuster that wasn't really a filibuster. It was just a really long speech by Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey. He spoke for 25 hours, and all of the media and the Democrats patted him on the back and said, what a great job. He gave the longest speech ever in the U.S. Senate. But I don't know, all the news sources I looked at trying to find out what the speech was about, they didn't tell us what it was about. It was just that he spoke for a very long time. He spoke for 25 hours, and what a great accomplishment this is. It seemed to me like it was a masterclass in being a politician, talking for a long time without saying anything. You had a great piece on this. What was your take on the Cory Booker filibuster, Jack?
Well, like you, I tried to figure out what the purpose of this filibuster was. So I read all the legacy establishment media stories about it in the mainstream outlets, and I deduced this. They all really, really liked that Cory Booker did this, and I read a dozen, if not more, different reasons for his filibuster. I'm doing the quotations because it wasn't a filibuster. It was a senator deciding to talk for a long time for no apparent reason other than I'm a Democrat. I'm mad Trump's president. There's a bunch of other Democrats. They're mad Trump's president, and they're going to hang their hat on me because they have absolutely nothing else to hang their hat on right now. That's what that was. When Rand Paul did his filibuster in 2013, it was for something very specific. It was to block the nomination of John Brennan to the head of the CIA because Senator Paul wanted an answer from the Obama White House on whether they believed they had the authority or not constitutionally to drone kill an American citizen without due process. He just wanted an answer before that moved forward. Ted Cruz, a few months later, would filibuster against Obamacare. There was a reason. Everybody compared Cory Booker's filibuster, his long speech, to Strom Thurmond, who held the prior record in length. What was Strom Thurmond filibustering against? Civil rights. I don't say I agree with that, but I'm saying there's a reason. Cory Booker had no reason, got all the praise in the world. It was silly, good for him if you could talk for that long, but to what end?
Yeah, I had that thought too. It's I know their aim was, well, he wants to break Strom Thurmond's record. Right. He wanted to break his record on the filibuster of civil rights, but it was like, all right, well, yeah, okay, you technically broke the record for giving the longest speech, but I mean, you would hope that if someone broke the record, it was something of purpose. Like, I would love to see that record shattered. I would love to see that record shattered, but it's not really going to overshadow that speech because it'll be an asterisk that Strom Thurmond's speech was, his record was beaten by Senator Cory Booker, who gave a speech about who knows what.
Right, exactly. That's what it'll look like in the history book. So, the Democratic Party doesn't know what it stands for right now, other than they hate one guy. Actually, they throw Elon Musk in there, but hate is the operative word there. They don't have anything positive to run on or talk about.
Well, and I like that you bring up the comparison to Senator Rand Paul's filibuster in 2013, because I remember that it was only half the length of time, 13 hours rather than 25. But right, it wasn't against Barack Obama in general, right? Even when Ted Cruz filibustered Obamacare, and I think there was some legitimate reasons to criticize how Ted Cruz did it, where he was like up there, like reading, Green Eggs and Ham to his kids back home to fill time. It's like, Rand Paul, at least when he filibustered, he was talking about the topic for the entire time. And I remember feeling like the Ted Cruz one was a little showboaty, but nothing compared to this Cory Booker one, where I can't even tell you what it is. So anyway, congratulations, Cory, on breaking the record. But I would hope that the U.S. Senate is more than just like the Guinness Book of World Records. It's not just about who can give the longest speech. But that seems to be where the Democratic Party is today. They can talk a lot while just repeating, corporate press approved pieties.
I will say this too. A lot of people don't know this, even though Rand has said it himself. Strom Thurmond and Cory Booker kind of planned to do a filibuster. Maybe Ted Cruz did too. I don't know. But they knew that day when they woke up and went into the office that they were going to talk for a long time. Yeah. Rand didn't know. He was prepared to do it if need be. But he, like he said, he didn't wear his most comfortable shoes that day. He had not thought to go to the bathroom right before because he knew what he was going to do. It just kind of turned into that. So I think that's a significant difference as well. It was about as legit as you could get.
Yeah, I guess that's interesting. I didn't actually know that aspect of it. I didn't know that Rand. Rand probably would have stopped an hour in if he got an answer from the Obama administration that they weren't that they didn't believe they had the authority to drone strike U.S. citizens on U.S. soil. Which people should remember that the Obama administration did drone strike U.S. citizens on foreign soil without any due process. So it was a very, very legitimate question where they considered to be the bounds of their constitutional authority, considering they were already way exceeding what most of us would consider to be the plain text of the Constitution.
Yeah, they drone killed an American citizen named Anwar al-Awlaki, and they said he was associated with terrorists. Well, if he was, let's have due process and let's take care of him that way. That's all anybody was arguing. We're the United States, and American citizens have certain rights. Worse than that, as bad as that was legally and constitutionally, they drone killed, this is the Obama I'm talking about, his 16-year-old son, who hadn't been accused of anything. Neither of them were charged with anything, but hadn't been accused of anything. Robert Gibbs, the press secretary for the Obama White House at that time, was asked, why did you do this with no due process? And Robert Gibbs said, basically, he should have picked a better father. An administration can't treat U.S. citizens like that if the Constitution still matters. So that was kind of what was going on during the Rand Paul filibuster moment. We just gone through that history.
Yeah. Well, let's hop to, I guess, the primary thing I want to talk about today, which is kind of building on the panel discussion that you and I had, along with our mutual friend JP Cortez of the Sound Money Defense League at YALCON about 90 years. Senator Rand Paul, Dr. Ron Paul turns 90 years old this year. It has been let's see, what is it? It's 2025. It's been 13 years since the end of the last Ron Paul campaign for president. And we had a good talk about what exactly has been, looking back 13 years now since that final moment of his final campaign, what has been the legacy of the Ron Paul movement. And I think actually last time, maybe the first time you were on the show, we were talking about it, but that was over a year ago. So there's a whole extra year of legacy to examine. Jack, what would you say is the legacy of the Ron Paul movement now, 13 years after Ron Paul's last run for president?
Well, there's different ways to answer that question. I'll say a little bit of what I said in Atlanta on the panel with you and JP. And I don't think a lot of people remember this. When Senator Rand Paul decided to run for the U.S. Senate, that was barely 2 years since his father's 2008 presidential campaign that blew up. It was a factor in why Senator Paul, or just then Dr. Rand Paul, decided to run. He made that announcement. He did two announcements, one for Kentucky, obviously, where he was running to be a representative in the U.S. Senate. And he did an announcement nationally to kind of address his father's movement. People like you and I, Eric, the Ron Paul people, the Ron Paul kids in many instances. Rand Paul had to make that announcement on the Rachel Maddow show. Now try to wrap your head around that in 2025. Rand Paul, Mr. Tea Party, libertarian, son of Ron Paul, had to go on Rachel Maddow because conservative high-profile figures, your Rush Limbaughs, your Sean Hannitys, none of them wanted anything to do with Ron Paul. They didn't like him, and certainly nothing to do with his son, who could be a senator, who they didn't want to be a senator. That's how much things have changed, and that's a lot of what, now we're in an environment where Donald Trump is president, says some anti-war things, doesn't always live up to them. MAGA conservative on the right, you can use the word warmonger and those neocons suck and say all these things, and that's just like regular language. Well, in 2008, it was just Ron Paul people talking like that, and the average Republican voter who were marinated in Bush, Cheney, neoconservatism, the Iraq war was good and right, and the Patriot Act was awesome, and torture's not even torture. That was the mindset then. They would look at a Ron Paul or us who supported Ron Paul and be like, you guys are liberal Democrats. I'm a Republican. I'm Bush Cheney. Well, now a lot of those same people, or at least their kids, are like, I'm a Republican. I'm MAGA. I'm for Trump. And they would agree with us on a lot of these foreign policy things, or even free speech, or something like ending the Fed. When we were chanting that at Ron Paul rallies in 2008 and 2012, that sounded really radical to a lot of regular Republicans. I don't think it sounds as radical as it did back then. And we could do that on a litany of issues. But, you have Ron Paul 2008, which exploded. I said at the conference on the panel, I knew who Ron Paul was when he ran in 2008. I didn't think it would amount to anything. And what attracted me to Ron Paul was, whoa, thousands of people are flocking to this guy who's bashing the Bush administration, bashing the war. He's the oldest guy in the race, and he's got the youngest supporters. That's what attracted me. I was sort of an anti-war conservative, not even libertarian. And it was even bigger than 2008. Ron Paul got 1 million primary votes in 2008, and he received 2 million in 2012. That's the primary. That's a big deal. In 2008, I always like to point out that Rudy Giuliani, who was supposed to be the front runner that year, who the media sort of anointed, got less votes than Ron Paul in 2008. And it was the spat with Giuliani on May 15, 2007, in which Ron Paul defended the idea of blowback, a CIA term, as an explanation as to why the 9/11 attacks happened. Ron Paul said that they came here and attacked us because we're over there with our military interventions. And Rudy Giuliani was so offended. He had demanded an apology. And Ron Paul, being Ron Paul, just continued to school him and everybody in that audience who booed and didn't like it. And all the experts said it was the end of Ron Paul, and that's exactly when his movement exploded. So you asked me a simple question, Eric, and I probably gave you too many answers, but we could do this for hours.
Well, at least for the next 30 minutes, there's plenty. There's plenty more we can discuss. It is amazing to kind of think back on those times, and I think especially about, and I think this was the value of being at Young Americans for Liberty and talking with, of course, Young Americans for Liberty started as students for Ron Paul, but it being a young person's organization, the audience we were speaking to were like college students. They were mostly like 18 to 22, and we're talking about a political campaign that ended 13 years ago when the youngest members of this audience would have been like 5 years old. Like, and I don't know, how politically aware you were at 5 years old, Jack, but I certainly, I remember being 7 and voting for Bob Dole in my like second grade presidential straw poll. But I
think I supported the Smurfs back then.
But I didn't really understand the political dynamics of the moment back then, certainly in any real way. I think that it's hard for some of the younger people to really understand just how captured the Republican Party was by neoconservatism at the time, considering that now it is very what's the word? It is very popular with the Republican base to trash and bash on the neoconservatives like Liz Cheney and others. And we can say what we will about the Trump administration. Frankly, there are still too many neoconservatives around him for my comfort. But it certainly seems that whatever we might say about him, the Republican base has been transformed and between now and then. And I think probably you and I agree that Ron Paul is kind of the missing link between here and there in terms of injecting those ideas into the Republican conversation.
He was the battering ram that sort of prepared everybody for the shift in the party. Ron Paul 08 was the beginning. You look, I've talked to people who think Howard Dean screaming in 2004 was sort of a Democrat populist moment and sort of showed inklings of what was to come. Because you remember Bernie Sanders ran later and that was a populist movement. Yeah. So some sort of populism was going to happen. It was libertarian populism through Ron Paul in 08 and 2012. And you had the Tea Party movement there in the middle. A lot of them like Ron, a lot of them like Sarah Palin at the time. So it was sort of a mixture. But it was something markedly different than the Bush-Cheney Republican base when it was purely that. It was different. And by the time you get to Trump, you're having conversations that were once radical that are now mainstream, that things that Ron Paul was saying. Elon Musk tweets Ron Paul's like, listen to this guy. He might be a mentor. He is a mentor to Doge. We're living in a whole different world. It's hard for me to imagine what the political environment in the United States would look like if Ron Paul didn't run. I don't know the answer to that. Might be better, might be worse. I think it would probably be worse.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine we have just finished the second term of Jeb. It certainly seems to me that the without Ron Paul having run his 2 presidential campaigns, there's some practical mechanical things. I think I brought this up at the panel, in the panel, like, there is the simple fact that, like, because of what we did in 2012 on the Ron Paul campaign, because we won several states, we won caucuses, and we sent delegates to the national convention to vote for Ron Paul, and the establishment overreacted and rammed through these rule changes to require all delegates to be bound going forward, so that states like Maine couldn't elect delegates who had the freedom of conscience to vote for who they wanted to vote for, rather than being bound by some preference poll. Because of that rule change, retaliating against the Ron Paul supporters, the political establishment 4 years later found themselves trapped when Donald Trump had all the delegates bound to him, and they weren't actually people who, in their conscience, supported Donald Trump. They were more establishment figures, but they had to vote for him because of those rule changes. And so certainly from a mechanical perspective, it's certainly, perhaps you wouldn't have had Donald Trump win the nomination if not for that. But But
That's a good point. You also brought up earlier about the time frame. The young people we talked to in Atlanta who might have been 18 or 20 or 21 years old in the time frame from Ron's last campaign in 2012. Well, the movement sort of endured, but I would compare it to this, Eric. When Reagan ran in 76 and finally became president in 1980, that was a big thing in the conservative movement, right? Well, his foot soldiers a lot of them were former Barry Goldwaterites. Yeah. Right. I mean, like Morton Blackwell in the Leadership Institute, whatever age Morton is now, he was a Goldwater guy. But that was the basis of the conservative movement. So imagine from 1964 to 1976, you don't really have any presidential campaigns to hang your hat on. You know what I'm saying? We had Rand Paul run and then drop out, and you had Trump. But that was sort of the basis of the Reagan Revolution, which was a big deal and was an organic and grassroots thing up. They did all that within that time frame and got people excited. They didn't have the internet. We have that. So that's a whole game changer in social media. So it's really not that big of a gap if you compare the two.
I think there's some, and I remember writing a piece on this several years back. I think there's something about when you have, like the Goldwater Revolution it was a young person's revolution, and young people have a lot of energy and loud voices, but what they don't have is money. They don't have the kinds of establishment credibility that is often looked for in politics. But the thing with young people is eventually they become older people, and they have professional success. They have financial resources. They accumulate the certain kind of credentials that make them be taken more seriously in political arenas. And of course, I think over the last 13 years, I always go back to what Ron Paul said at the end of his campaign. People went to him and said, Dr. Paul, I want to continue fighting for liberty. Tell me what to do. And Dr. Paul, being no central planner, said, I don't know. You got to figure it out for yourself. And people did. People went off and they built the homeschooling revolution, or they went off and they built the Bitcoin revolution, or they ran for the state legislature themselves, or so many different paths to fighting for freedom. And I think that the Free State Project is a real microcosm of that here in New Hampshire. You see all of it here. But 13 years in, a lot has happened. I mean, I even just looking at the state legislatures around the country to see how many Ron Paul influenced legislators there are now. I mean, you got close to 100 of them in New Hampshire alone, but this is to a lesser degree replicated around so many state capitals, thanks in part to the HASLA coalition that Young Americans for Liberty has put together, and the work that they've done kind of sending door knockers out to help people win their elections. There's maybe we don't have too many people in Congress other than Rand and Massey, but in the state legislatures, it seems like there's a quiet revolution happening in this country. And while the MAGA movement is very dominant on the national level, and certainly there's a lot of coalition opportunities with the MAGA movement, I certainly prefer the MAGA movement to the neoconservatives. On the state level, it seems like there's a lot more actual, tangible, clear victories for the libertarian movement that have taken place.
Yes, no, I would totally agree with that. And look, part of that is, I said this at the panel, but it was worth repeating again here. My first vote, you joked earlier saying, you were 7 years old and you voted for Bob Dole. Well, I was of age to vote, and I voted for Bob Dole too. I was a teenager. That was my first vote. But the reason I did that, I was a Pat Buchanan guy. And he won the New Hampshire primary that year. It was a sort of a populist uprising within the Republican Party. He was an anti-war conservative, which was what I became because of his influence. And he won the New Hampshire primary. He was on the cover of magazines. It was a big deal. And that election ended. Bob Dole was the nominee. He lost, and that Pat Buchanan movement just sort of evaporated. He ran in 2000 on the Reform Party ticket, but it wasn't a big thing. The Ron Paul movement weaponized by institutionalizing. Now, I know that the Free State Project precedes the Ron Paul movement, but boy, are y'all an important institution within that fabric. Look at the former students for Ron Paul, now Young Americans for Liberty. The politicians, the Republican, libertarian-friendly people that you see in the state houses, how many of those got a lot of help in getting elected from Young Americans for Liberty in their efforts? if you see what I'm saying. You institutionalize, you have these places that still matter and keep the movement alive. That's important. And the Ron Paul movement did that. And, Rand Paul's an institution. Thomas Massey's an institution. I would argue people like Tim Burchett and Chip Roy in the House are not thorough libertarians, but if you look at how they vote and who they're friends with, they're with us an awful lot of the time. So there's that too. There was a time when everybody was just neocon. That's all there was, except for Ron Paul by himself. So yeah, I think institutionalizing, weaponizing our movement through these different figures and institutions was vitally important. And that's exactly what happened. We're still here. We're still enduring. We're talking about it not like it's some wistful memory and we've got, black and white percent. No, it's still going on. I'm coming to see you in June.
Yeah. 22 years going on with Porkfest. It has, we certainly are at the Free State Project all about institution building, and we've got our own institution with our Free State Project org, but people come here and they build their own institutions, and certainly as people change out and some people drop in and out of the movement, life goes in phases, but these institutions that are built from YAL, the FSP, to here in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and so many other things, these help promote sustainable long-term change. And I think that we are certainly seeing that in New Hampshire. Let me ask you, though, what do you see as the state of the neoconservative movement at this point in time?
Well, they're still strong because they've been institutionalized forever because they have deep pockets and just, there's a bipartisan foreign policy establishment in D.C. that does not want diplomacy and wants war wherever possible. I think Massey said not too long ago, if you see things wind down in Ukraine, wait for it somewhere else. Look what we're doing with the Houthis right now.
Yeah.
And what happens there. The state of the neoconservatives, I was having a conversation with a younger friend not so long ago, and I was like, dude, when I was your age, he's in his 20s, my political dream, we should have better dreams than just political dreams, personal things and other things. But my political dream was out of the Republican Party and for them to be the odd man out. He looked at me like, well, that kind of happened. I was like, well, it kind of did. Not in total. Lindsey Graham's still there. Tom Cotton can write essays about why I'm not a neoconservative as he continues to vote like a neoconservative. I wouldn't want that name now either. But just the fact that he doesn't want to be called that anymore is kind of interesting, right? But it's an organic base. They love Donald Trump. They love J.D. Vance. They love RFK. They love Tulsi. They love Vivek Ramaswamy when he was there. And they're closer to us in many ways, the Ron Paul people. And then there's the Republican establishment that just doesn't know what to do. They're like, we can't overcome this Trump guy. I mean, look at all the things they tried to do with the Democrats. It was the Biden administration and Republicans that just didn't want Trump back. They talk about being a threat to democratic standards and norms. I've never seen so many bends of democratic standards and norms as the 2024 election and what they did to this guy and weaponizing the legal system against Trump and all this. So yeah, that's what the neocons are at. They're desperate, but they still got power. They can still get their way sometimes, but they can't fool the base like they used to. When George Bush went to Iraq, they had everybody convinced that Saddam was between 9/11. Why? Because the vice president and the president and people like Condoleezza Rice would say that. And then when they caught the lie, they were like, oh, no, we didn't say that. Well, here's the video. People. That's what neocons do. We're going there for democracy and, to save these people's freedom and all that. No, you were going there because you're a neocon. You want war. You've been planning this since the 90s. Bill Clinton wouldn't do it. 9/11 happened, and now you got George W. Bush to do it. Those people can't fool the base and just sort of mold and manipulate them like they used to. And it really frustrates them, and I love to see it. Yeah.
I will say nothing quite disgusted me more than hearing neoconservatives like Liz Cheney invoke the Constitution over and over again in recent years. And I'm just thinking, these are the people who created Guantanamo Bay. These are the people who established the Patriot Act. These are the people who launched countless illegal wars without declarations. And they're going to lecture us about the Constitution. I just feel like it's like almost like taking the Lord's name in vain. Like, drop that word from your mouth. You don't deserve to be able to claim the Constitution. Not to say that there certainly are some things Donald Trump is doing that concern me constitutionally.
Absolutely.
I'm concerned about this whole I mean, some of the free speech crackdowns that are going on college campuses.
He's being really hypocritical in that. He ran a free speech campaign. RFK talked about it all the time, and he's doing to people who, I don't agree with these people all the time, some things, and some are genuinely anti-Semitic, but you have the freedom to do that in the United States under the First Amendment. Nazis marched in Skokie, Illinois in 1978, and the ACLU won that court battle. Like, they were anti-Semitic too, but you have that right. You know, the Trump administration basically targeting people for their speech. I don't care what the speech is. I'm a free speech absolutist, and the courts have determined that the First Amendment protects that speech. How is that any different than universities and people? You know, if you say there's two genders, oh, that's offensive to me. That's offensive to the trans community. You can't say that. Democrats might want to target you, and they did try to do that. Well, that's unconstitutional. This is the Republicans' version of that, and it's just gross, and it's wrong. It's unconstitutional. I hope it gets struck down and we can move past it and get back to the free speech promises that we were originally talking about.
Well, let me ask you, I know it was a big controversy a few weeks ago. Of course, the media cycle, the news cycle moves quickly. But this whole kind of the signal chat that came out,
right?
The planning of war plans or attack plans, whatever you want to call them, on the Houthis in Yemen. Then Jeffrey Goldberg. I always get Jeffrey Goldberg and Jonah Goldberg confused. They're both neocons. But you know, it seemed to me that certainly whatever the security thing of Signal and all of that, and having a reporter in there who shouldn't have been there, like, that's what everyone focused on. But what was disappointing to me, far more than kind of this you know, not doing good security or all of this, what disappointed me most was to see that we were bombing Yemen again. And some of the very people who I had a little bit of cautious optimism were going to be voices of sanity and all that. I mean, you have Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who has been on the record before he's Secretary of Defense in support of Defend the Guard. And he talked about, he said a lot of the right things about, you know, kind of America First foreign policy. And you have Tulsi Gabbard there, who, you know, she said right things in the past about, like, why bombing Yemen is the wrong thing to do. And what was revealing, and I think somewhat sad, was the only person who voiced any concern about it, at least from what we saw, was JD Vance. And it wasn't even for, like, the reasons that I would hope people would object to it. Like, I think he objected. He said, I think this is a bad idea because it's, you know, this is Europe's problem, not our problem. Europe should deal with it, not us. They're the ones who go through these shipping lanes. Only a small fraction of our traffic in there is our ships, and yet you know, that was it. Nothing about, like, bombing civilians and murdering innocent people. Nothing, you know, nothing about getting dragged into this conflict all over again. That Trump was on the record criticizing Joe Biden for doing the exact same thing. What do you make of all of this? I know that the National Security Advisor, who is the one who was supposedly responsible, or most directly responsible, as far as anyone can piece things together, for Jeffrey Goldberg.
Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic.
Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg being there. I forget his name, but I mean, he's an adamant, Mike Walls, right? He's an adamant neoconservative, and I certainly wouldn't mind if he got the boot over this. But what do you make of that whole situation that went on with certainly some of the figures we like who were involved in all that?
Well, a couple of things, and you touched on them. As to what happened itself, and how did Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic be included in a national security team's discussion about American foreign policy in Yemen? Mike Waltz invited him into that group. I don't care what he says. You don't get just fall into this encrypted group. And Jeffrey Goldberg is a notorious neocon. The lies about WMDs and Saddam Hussein being in cahoots with Osama bin Laden of the Weekly Standard. Jeffrey Goldberg was a part of all that crap. He was a part of Trump is in collusion with Putin that we investigated for 2 years, and Robert Mueller found zilch. Just to give everybody an idea of what Jeffrey Goldberg is and where he stands for. He's a warmongering neocon. So if you're Mike Waltz, you're on Team Trump, and you're a warmongering neocon, maybe you're, I don't know, showing off, like, yeah, you got Tulsi and JD there, but look what I'm doing, that kind of thing. That's how I read that. Now, the only people upset about what was actually being discussed that I've seen are sort of anti-war MAGA types that take that seriously, and the libertarians. We're looking at this like, why are we bombing the Houthis? Why are we doing this? And why are people bragging about it? Tulsi said something pretty bad about it in there. And why is it left to J.D. Vance to be the only guy that says, hey, I don't think this is in line with America First messaging? Like, you think? I'm glad he said that. But, that's where our minds go. Democrats focused on how were they so clumsy and incompetent that this dude was in there. Why? Because they don't have anything. There's nothing positive. All they have is we hate Trump, going back to our Cory Booker discussion. If this was 2004 and this was the issue, there was a Democratic base that was opposed to Bush and the wars that would have been like, this is another example of American imperialism, and why are we doing this in the first place? That's not where they are anymore. That's left to people on the right. Outside of Medea Benjamin and Code Pink, which is about 12 people, none of that on the left anymore. They didn't care. They just wanted to show that Trump was incompetent and look at this Signal chat. That's it. So
yeah, it's
sad.
I don't remember who made this comparison. Maybe it was Dave Smith or Tom Woods or someone, and I think it was an apt comparison. Like, it's very reminiscent of when what's her name? Undersecretary of State, neoconservative, who orchestrated the whole kind of Ukraine proxy war. Victoria Nuland, right?
Victoria Nuland.
Right. Victoria Nuland, the whole leaked phone call of where she's planning the coup in Ukraine and who's going to be in the new government. And the person she's talking with, I think it's like the ambassador to Ukraine, is like, well, the Europeans are the EU is not on, is dragging their heels on this. And she said, I'll censor it she said, F the EU, right? She used the actual word. I don't know if there's kids listening. F the EU, she said, right? Here she is planning a coup over a foreign government, right? Throwing out their democratically elected president and handpicking a new government, right? And the media focuses on how inappropriate it was that she said F the EU, right? And it's like, it's this fake controversy. Who cares? Who cares that she said F the EU? I care about the fact that they overthrew the government of Ukraine. But it's like this, look at the controversy over here, so you don't see the real terrible evil doings that are going on. So it's like, okay, maybe they shouldn't have been using Signal. Certainly Goldberg shouldn't have been there. But like, is that the most objectionable thing that's going on here? But that's what we're all told to be upset about.
If your goal is to make this president look as bad as possible, that's what's important to them. Not our foreign policy, not how it affects the world, not how it affects our economy or lives abroad. That's not their concern. Their concern is we hate Trump. Thank you, Cory Booker, for talking about it for 25 hours. Didn't do anything, didn't accomplish anything, but they're babies. I mean, that's where we're at. The only people upset about what was actually happening, the bad foreign policy decisions discussed in that Signal chat that I can tell, are the 12 people still in Code Pink, anti-war MAGA types, and Ron Paul libertarian types. That's it.
Well, Jack, I'm really excited that you're coming back to PorcFest this year. I know that you last year you came out to Liberty Forum, you came out to PorcFest. What do you remember of PorcFest last year? And that's so wonderful, inspiring that you're coming back again.
My first thing is when I got there is I was embarrassed I'd never been there before and been for so long, and I hadn't been to PorcFest, so I'm really excited to come back this year. And the reason I was embarrassed about it is because how awesome it was. I like the community feel. I like a lot of the high-profile speakers that you guys brought in. Everybody's camping and eating and having a good time, and it's New Hampshire weather that time of the year. It's a lot better than South Carolina weather that time of year in June. I just absolutely loved it. It's a meeting of the minds, and I saw a lot of old faces, some people hadn't seen in a while, and met new people too. I thought it was absolutely wonderful.
Awesome. Well, I know, Jack, we're really looking forward to having you back again. What do we have you speaking about at PorcFest this year?
I think I'm going to talk about pork rinds. I'm kidding. I'm not talking about pork rinds. I don't know. To be determined. A lot of it I think will have to do with the news cycle and what's going on. I always try to do that. Others don't. That's their specialty. But I'm sure I'll figure something out, and I promise it won't be boring.
Awesome. Well, you never are, Jack. And I know I've told you before, it's funny. I was sitting there on the panel, at YALCON, and JP Cortez, a little bit younger than me, as he's telling his kind of coming of age story to the liberty movement, and he looks to his left and he says, I'm sitting next to these two people who I looked up to and who inspired me to get into this movement. And I thought, oh, wow, that was really nice. And I looked to my left and I said, I'm sitting next to Jack Hunter, who helped inspire me to get into this movement. And Jack, I always say it, I really appreciate so much the content that you created during the Ron Paul days, how persuasive. I think I learned a lot from reading your content and watching your videos that you used to produce on how to be politically persuasive in selling the liberty message to conservative audiences. I always remember it was like one of the moments that helped me kind of achieve the light bulb moment where, I just always remember this description you gave of, if we're conservatives, right, we think big government is bad and it's wasteful and they overspend. And that's why the federal Department of Education is just a bloated bureaucracy and we should get rid of it. Maybe we're actually getting rid of it finally. But then you said, and where's the magical fairy dust we sprinkle over the Department of Defense to make it anything different? And it was just like, it was a light bulb. It was a light bulb moment for me because I realized you were absolutely right. There's nothing fundamentally different about government bureaucracy, whether it's the Department of Defense or the Department of Education. And it's the same incentives, the same waste. I mean, of course, the Department of Defense hasn't passed an audit ever. Anyway, I learned a lot from you, Jack, and you. There were a number of people who helped kind of get me where I am today, but intellectually, Ron Paul, yourself, a few others. So I just want to say thank you, Jack, and I really appreciate that you're still out there speaking to conservatives and pushing them to become libertarians.
Well, I appreciate the kind words as always, Eric, and I also appreciate all your hard work and contributions, whether it's the Free State Project, what you did with Young Americans for Liberty, running for office and taking on neocons head on, who were very worried about Eric Brakey being anywhere near power. If we all
they spent a lot of money against me.
Yes,
I guess that was a sign of it was a little bit of a compliment how much money they spent against me.
Yes, it was. And it was a valiant effort. And it's just a reminder how much power they had. They were scared of you, Eric. And I'll never forget that. And I'll cherish our friendship that we've had since that day we met at Webster Hall at a Ron Paul speech in 2011 or 2012, whatever year that was in New York City. So it's been a long time, friend.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to having you back at PorcFest. And Jack, any final words you want to share with folks as we wrap up the episode?
I'm more optimistic about the possibilities for things we care about as liberty-minded people than I ever have been, even more than 2008, 2012, for a variety of reasons. Just we're in the Wild West ideologically right now. Some really bad things can happen, but some really good things can happen. You mentioned the Department of Education. It's going away. Looks like, that was a pipe dream for a lot of conservatives. And here we are. Maybe we can audit the Pentagon, but the possibilities are there. And it's not just the Trump administration, what might come next and then on. We're not so old that we're not going to have some years to look at what happens and have some optimism.
Awesome. Jack, where can people find you?
I'm writing for the Libertarian Institute. You can find me at Rand Paul Review. That's a Substack. I'd encourage people to go there. Apparently Rand Paul likes it. He's tweeted us a bunch of times. You can find me at the American Conservative. And you can find me on Twitter, Jack Hunter 74, or X now. I guess I should say it the right Elon Musk way, Jack Hunter 74.
Awesome, Jack. Thank you for coming on today, and we'll see you at PorcFest.
Absolutely. Can't wait.
All right, everyone. That's the show. Again, get your tickets. New Hampshire Liberty Forum, April 24th through the 27th. That's coming up very soon. Only a few dozen tickets left. You're going to want to get your tickets now in case we sell out, because it's looking very possible we may sell out. So get your tickets. New Hampshire Liberty Forum, nhlibertyforum.com. And while you're at it, go get your tickets for PorcFest. It is right around the corner. June will be here before you know it. And you're going to want to start making your plans for your campsite, for your hub, for I don't know. Some people rent Airbnbs or stays in hotels if they're not up for the whole camping experience. Just come. We want you to be there. We want you to come and taste the revolution. PorcFest.com. And again, a gift from me to you, 10% off your tickets for either event. Use the discount code Granite Gulch, because that's what we're building here in New Hampshire. Like Galt's Gulch, where all the people who love freedom go to build their free society to get away from the looting class and the politicians and all of that. Well, we're building that here in New Hampshire in our Granite Gulch in the Granite State, the free state of New Hampshire. So use discount code Granite Gulch, get yourself 10% off your Liberty Forum and or your Pork Fest tickets. And additionally, I want to encourage you, as a nice little bonus, stick after the show because we're going to play for you. We just released it on social media. It had been in the hopper for a little while, and we finally got it out. But we're gonna add it to the end of this episode, since we were talking about the legacy of Ron Paul and the revolution that he initiated over these last 13 years. Last year at Pork Fest, we had Dr. Ron Paul. He zoomed in over the internet, and I did a live Q&A with him at Pork Fest. Now, I thought some of his answers were very interesting and intriguing, and not all the typical stuff that you typically hear from Ron Paul. So stick around after the show. We're going to add that on to the end of this episode so you can hear it for yourself. And I want to thank, as always, our producer for this show, Renita, who does a fantastic job making us all look good. And furthermore, my opinion is the Federal Reserve should be destroyed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. Now we have about 20 minutes left, and over the course of Pork Fest, I've been talking with so many folks here and getting questions that we could ask to Dr. Paul today, and I think we got a pretty interesting assortment from the folks here. So we'll go through as much as we can with the time that we have, and I'll start with the first one about New Hampshire. So Dr. Paul, your campaigns and your grassroots support in 2008 and 2012 always had a really strong presence here in the Granite State. Can you share a memory or two from your times on the campaign trail in New Hampshire?
Well, it was the first place I went when people talked me into running, because I was truly reluctant because, and they said, why? And I said, well, I don't want to run people's lives and the economy and run the world, so I have a hard time. But no, I went there the first time, very first, and I can remember one rally we had up there that I had a son that family members came up for it when we were involved, and one of my sons decided, well, I'd like to be participating in this, and he sort of took charge of it, and we had a rally, but he was the MC. I think I recall the son that I'm talking about is Rand. He was eager, but no, it was always well received, and I liked going there. And I guess even in New Hampshire and so many places, can you believe there were questions about the vote? I thought, well, they'll at least count the votes. Who cares about what's going on now in our little old campaign? But no, I think there were some I think if somebody who really kept up with those details, my guess would be 5 or 6 states where there was a lot of miscounting that went on.
I certainly, and we were talking a bit earlier about some of the miscounting that went on in Maine, where we, of course, had a great presence there. So I remember that. But here's another question that came from folks. As you know, the Liberty message has always been popular with young people. And at Pork Fest this year, there are over 400 children and teens that are in attendance with their families. And is there any advice you would give to young people who want to make a difference for the cause of freedom?
Study hard, look to the people that are expressing the truth, and you'll sense who they are, and get where you can talk about it. And when they throw out questions that seem like, what the left always does, you don't care about people, and you don't want to defend our country, that sort of thing. You have to think and do that. But no, the young people, that energized me. People would thank me for coming out, and we had, as time went on, our crowds were getting bigger, and I said, well, that's pretty nice. I said, but yeah, I said, I came to the conclusion, I would say it frequently, that young people, and if I include everybody who's young at heart too, but mostly the young people that you're talking about, they were very open to the message. It didn't. I said, well, you know what? If I go to the Chamber of Commerce meeting, I don't get any converts really. Say, boy, that's exciting, Ron. This is really good. I love this idea. And they're more interested in some detail that might affect, their imports and whether a tariff is going to help them or not. And so, or what's the interest rate what's the Fed going to do next week? So it's something that I think is true. I think we really should do it. That's the reason why after I do this program today, I will be going to a homeschool group that's going to be meeting here in Texas. And I really strongly believe in it. And we have our own program. It's not gigantic, but the whole point of my homeschooling group is not having one narrow approach. It's not designed to promote some religious principle or anything, but it's to preserve. For me, our education is to just give them good history and good English and good math and good biology and this kind of stuff, and if people would, see this and make a difference. So I think that this is wonderful that we have it. In the early 1980s, they were going to close down homeschooling. So I think homeschooling is great. Parents who think about it or are doing it, encourage them because, I think, people say, do you know what? We spend a lot of money on sending our kids off to these big colleges with big names. We spend a lot of money and they can't get jobs because they're not trained to do anything. That's good news. That's good news. Wake up, folks. You can get an education somewhere else and it's available, but you have to have freedom. You have to have freedom of choice where people can go and start opportunities and you can help make your own opportunities because the government's not there to regulate you and keep you from competing with the government.
All right. Another issue that folks here at PorcFest seem really united around is a policy measure that's being pursued in the state legislatures and passed in the New Hampshire House of Representatives this past year. And it's a bill called Defend the Guard, in which states would call home their National Guard troops from wars that Congress has not properly declared. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on Defend the Guard legislation?
Oh, they should have never been sent. I said, yes, they should come home. And I always amazing, when they say, well, I remember the first time I read a story about the Coast Guard being in the Mediterranean Sea or in the Far East. I said, well, that's our coast doesn't go that far. But in a way, the empire believers say they are our coast. We have coasts everywhere, and we're expanding them. So no, the Guard. And the terms are important because I think of militia the way it is. The militia should be legal, and if but the whole idea is the militia morphed into the National Guard, and the National Guard was morphed into the just an arm of the federal government, and they can be called up. Just think how many people were called up to go to the Middle East war. And I think that's what the bill is trying to do, stop that thing. But if they could do anything to put pressure or call attention to why are we over there anyway? So bring them home.
Awesome.
Yeah.
On a related note on foreign policy, another participant here was asking the question. Since the 2014 coup in Ukraine, Washington, D.C. and NATO have escalated tensions with Russia into a new Cold War. If you were president of the United States at this moment, what actions would you take to end this proxy war with Russia?
zero funding toward anything for that war, both sides. People say, you know, if I talk about defunding, they'll say, oh boy, you'll have a tough one when you have to talk about Palestinians and Israel. What are you going to do? Treat them equally. Don't send them any more money. Let them solve their own problem. So yes, I think that they should be brought home. And on Ukraine, I think there's a definite effort by NATO and the United States to precipitate this friction with Russia. You know, it bugs me to no end, because if you have regular news on by accident or something, and they always say when Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, you know, you ought to explain that. What was it like before 2014? It was the NATO really advanced, and they invaded by committing a coup. And then all of a sudden, the promises or pseudo promises and their expectation of us staying away from the borders of Russia as part of the ending of the Cold War, you know, that vanished. And now our weaponry is being used in all these wars to mostly protect our empire or expand our empire. So I think that the sooner we get out of there, the better. I remember after 9/11, and we were having a debate on, they brought me up the question of, you know, why I would support, why it was done. Why did bin Laden do this? I said, well, they're over here because we're over there, and it's no more complicated than that. And the crowd was very much with me even then, but boy, the media went nuts.
And what was true then is true now. Now, this question is from Dennis Pratt, who tells me he's been in the liberty movement so long, he remembers being at the 1988 Libertarian Party convention when you won the nomination there. But the question from Dennis is, you know, the Free State Project here in New Hampshire, we use a concentration strategy, bringing liberty-loving people from all corners of the country and the world to live, work, and raise family here in the Live Free or Die state to achieve a libertarian society. Do you have any thoughts or advice for those who are trying to use this kind of concentration strategy of bringing people together to advance and restore liberty?
Well, a couple questions or comments on this, because I think it's great. Anything that makes it, and I'm very open, I'm very libertarian on what you do, and you happen to be doing this on the Free State Movement. But there's the other argument, well, the message is universal. And I think the enemy has been universal. When you have the Teds or the Soroses, you know, they invaded the universities and they had bias every place. Our principles have to be evident everywhere. But you say, well, that means you're not for the project. No, I want you to be really successful, because then somebody else might say, boy, how are they doing that? And maybe, and it's the whole idea how you get other countries to come your way. Because if you're very, very successful, you should get them where they want to emulate what you're doing. And how did you achieve this? And the answer is, well, we just applied libertarian principles and freedom. So I would say, you know, there's no correct answer. No, you should be universal and spread out. There's some reasons not to do that. But in a narrow sense, people say, well, you're too narrow. You should be universal. I think either one is okay. But I just think that what you're doing in New Hampshire, people know about it, but I want everybody to know about it, and I want you to be super successful. But then you have to watch out on your immigration problem. You might have some counterfeiters moving in and wanting to change your rules, so you have to know about that. They better come to see you because you're spreading the message of liberty.
Thank you. I will. Yeah, we can applaud for that. I will say, because of the Free State Movement, it's the first time I've heard a lot of liberals complaining about immigration. All the libertarian immigrants coming to New Hampshire. Another question. You know, we are in the midst of a presidential election year, and many freedom lovers are stuck picking from what seems to be a field of flawed candidates. You know, there's no Ron Paul in the race, to say for certain. What advice would you give to people as they try to sort through this and make a decision for themselves in a race where there's no Ron Paul running?
Well, you don't want to waste your vote and vote for one of the major candidates. They always say you waste your vote if you don't. But no, if you vote for this nonsense, because there's not two major thrusts, like I think I said in the talk, that you know, both of those parties and most of the other candidates, even the ones that are very independent minded, they're not for bringing the troops home. They're not for getting rid of the Fed. They're not for this thing. And this is what the young people really liked about it. It was crystal clear what you ought to do. We don't need to be sending kids over there. We don't need a draft. We don't need a drug war. And that's what we need. So I think that it's something that can work if we just get everybody energized.
All right. In 2012, you finished your last campaign for president and retired from Congress and passed the torch of liberty on to everyone who would take up the call in the next generation. I think a lot of those folks are here with us today. 12 years later, what gives you hope when you look at the state of the liberty movement and how far it's come?
Two things. One, the apparent success and the change in what's going on in our country, like our foreign policy hasn't changed. And, you know, the economic policies are a disaster, all that kind of stuff. We still have the Fed. So in that way, I would say, you know, not too much has changed. But then when I look at what's happening, you know, in between the cracks and what's really happening intellectually in the literature, you know, I get very annoyed about all the terrible things that end up on the internet and how they spread evil messages and all. But it's the internet that is, and even when it began, the internet, I said, this is going to help us get our message out. And it is. I mean, the little bit of technology we're using today, I think this is fantastic that we can do this. But I think there's more and more people that are open-minded now and will do it. But so education-wise, I think we're making a lot of progress. There's so many people, a lot of people that I met and talked to during the campaigns and when I was in office that have their own organization, their own newsletter, their own podcast. And I hardly ever go a day where somebody will do it. And then I feel embarrassed because I can't remember everything that everybody did. So I'm sure there's, in a crowd like this, a lot of people who did a lot to encourage me. And I am very grateful for that. But my understanding is none of us get much done unless we have a presence. We have to, I talk about not so much brainwashing people, but we do need a prevailing attitude. We have to have a prevailing attitude where the general population said, you know, we lived a long time without a draft. We don't need it. What are those guys doing? We had that debate in the 70s, and we did drop the draft because of Vietnam, but that didn't last long. They were back with the registration, and right now they're stirring up more trouble. No, I think intellectually we're making advancement. I think in reality, the bad results are out there, but like I said, it's a wonderful opportunity because what they have, it's sort of like worrying about the dissolving of the Soviet system. And because I lived in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, you know, when we had a Soviet system, and all of a sudden, you know, the time I was drafted, it was actually because of the missiles in Florida. And they were close to Florida, Cuba, and I said that they were really, you know, wonderful that people could, you know, realize that this is going to end. And I think it will end, and I think that it's an opportunity. That's what my message is. Yeah, it's bad, but it's coming to an end. The Soviet system, when it broke down, was without a whimper almost. It was no nukes. You know, we had nukes all over the place and bomb shelters, and because it was intellectual, that was one thing. But the main reason it failed was the total failure of the exaggerated collectivism of Soviet communism.
All right. Dr. Paul, I think that was the last question. We are at the end of the hour, so I just want to say thank you so much for speaking with us today. Thank you for your lifetime of advocacy for the cause of freedom. And we're so grateful to have you at PorcFest this year. Could we all give a round of applause to the great Dr. Ron Paul?
Great. Nice being with you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.